Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to teach you the basics of how a C++ program works. So we're going to talk about stuff like include statements, input and output streams, libraries and namespaces, and the main function. So the idea for this video is just to go over these lines of code and kind of explain what they mean so that you kind of understand how a C++ program works. And then in the next video, I'm actually going to start teaching you how to program in C++. So I'm going to talk about variables and data types. But for now, let's just go over this program. This is a very simple program. All it does is just print hello onto the console. So let's start with the beginning. So the first line says hashtag include iostream. So iostream stands for input and output stream. And it is a library in C++ that allows you to get input from the user or output stuff to the console. So a library in C++ is basically a digital space that contains pieces of code that have certain functionalities. So for example, this word cout right here, it stands for character output. So it allows you to output characters onto the console. And this functionality is inside of the iostream library. So if I didn't have this line right here that says include iostream, then the program wouldn't know what cout is. So it wouldn't know what to do when it sees this word cout because it doesn't really know where it is located. So it doesn't know where to go to look for it and understand what it does and be able to apply it. So in order to use this cout here, since it is inside of the iostream library, I have to include that library in my program. And so when the program sees this cout word right here, it knows that it is inside of the iostream library. And so it goes in there and it has kind of the description and how it works and what it is supposed to do with it. But what do I mean by cout is inside of the iostream library? So when early developers of C++ were creating the language and were creating this functionality of outputting characters to the console, they actually wrote a lot of lines of code just to do this specific functionality, just to perform this specific functionality of outputting characters to the console. But it wouldn't be optimal for you to write all of those lines of code every time you want to output something to the console. So what they did was they stored all of those lines of code inside of this word. So what happens when you write cout is all of those lines of code are being executed, and that translates into you being able to output characters to the console. And then the cout word is inside of the iostream library that has kind of all of the lines of code that are inside of this word stored in there. And so that's why you have to include the library in your program. So I hope that was easy to understand. Let's move on to the second line, which says using namespace std. So std stands for standard. So we're basically saying that we're using the standard namespace. Now, inside of a library, there are kind of different families of code that are associated with different functionalities. Now, each of these families is a namespace. So inside of a library, there are a lot of namespaces, all associated with different functionalities. Now, there might be functionalities that are the same in different namespaces. What do I mean by this? So there could be another cout inside of iostream that is not in the namespace that we want. So it's not the cout that outputs characters to the console, some other cout that has some other functionality and is stored in some other namespace. And so in order for us to not confuse the two, this cout is going to be in the standard namespace and that other cout is going to be in another namespace. So we have to actually specify that we're using the standard namespace where this character output is stored and not some other cout that has a different functionality. So that's what a namespace is. Now, in practice, you don't really have to write this line right here as long as you specify every time that you want to character output, as long as you specify that that functionality is inside of this namespace. So if I just delete this, then the computer isn't going to know what it is, what cout is. So notice that at first it was blue, and then I deleted that using namespace std statement, and it turned white. So the computer doesn't really recognize what this means because it doesn't know that it is inside of the standard namespace. Now I have to specify that it is inside of the standard namespace. I'm going to write std to colons and then cout. Notice that it turned blue again. So now if I run this, then you can see that everything is working correctly. It's going to output hello. So if I don't want to write that using namespace std statement in the beginning, I have to specify each time I want to use cout that that functionality belongs to that namespace by writing this std and then 2 colons. Of course, this is a lot of work. So instead of this, you just write using namespace std, like so. So now let's get into how these 3 lines of code work. So ignore this first line for now. Let's just focus on this line right here that says cout hello. So this is going to output hello to the console, and notice that it has these arrows that represent kind of the flow of the stream because they are facing outward, and so this is an output stream, okay? And then in the end, we have this semicolon right here. So this is a line break, and it kind of separates commands. So if I didn't have this, then the program wouldn't know the beginning and the end of this command, so it wouldn't really know how to interpret it. So if I wrote like something like cout other thing, like hello again, and I didn't have that semicolon, then the program wouldn't know that these are actually 2 separate commands. And so to separate them, I have to write that line break, the semicolon right here and right here. So now notice that the computer recognizes this and it works just fine. Now, of course, you would write this in a different line, but you can also write it in the same line. Now, notice down here that it wrote hello, hello, like kind of one in front of the other. Now, you might not want this to happen, so you might want to add a paragraph or like a line break. So to do that, you can just write 2 more arrows and end line. So end L. This is the same thing as writing \n. So this is the escape character, and it adds a space between these words. So if I run this, you can see that there is now a paragraph between the hellos. And if I just write end L, so end L, and I run this, you can see that the same thing happens. Now I don't have to write this here. I could write it down here. So I could write end L, 2 arrows, and then hello. And if I run this, it outputs the same. And I could also just do a separate cout statement just for that end line. So I could say cout end L and then semicolon like this, and the output would be the same. Now you can also provide input to the console from your keyboard. So to do that, instead of writing cout, you're going to write cin because you're inputting characters. And then the arrows aren't going to be facing this way anymore. They're going to be facing the opposite way. So they're going to be facing inwards because this is an inward stream. You're not outputting anything, you're inputting stuff. Now, I'm not going to talk about this in depth, like exactly how you can do this because it requires some knowledge about data types and variables. So I'm going to leave this for the next video, but just so you know that it is possible and that you can do it. And cin is also inside of the standard namespace of the iostream library since it is an inwards stream. So now let's talk about this main right here. So every program in C++ has to have something called the main function. So a function is basically a piece of code that you're going to execute every time you run your program. So everything that you write inside of this main function is going to be executed automatically every time you run your program. And every C++ program has to have a main function. Now, if this isn't making any sense to you, then that's completely normal because you've never heard about this in your life before. but I'm going to make a single video just about functions because they are pretty complex. But you just have to know that every C++ program has to have a main function, and everything you do, you're going to do it inside of that main function. And then when you run your program, everything that's inside of that main function is going to be executed sequentially. Now, how do you know that something is inside of this function? Well, if it is inside of these curly braces, then it is inside of the function, and it's going to be executed automatically when you run the program. Now, this int here stands for integer, and it basically means that this function is going to return an integer. So it's going to return a whole number. An integer is a data type that, well, is a whole number. Now, you don't really have to understand this. Also, because this main function is kind of different from other functions, so it doesn't really necessarily have to return an integer, but it was just for you to kind of understand what int means and know that it isn't just there because it is there. It's there for a reason, and even though you don't really fully understand it, you have an idea. So the last thing I want to talk about are comments. Comments are pieces of code that are ignored by the program. So they are only used for you to keep track of what you're doing, especially in bigger programs when you're doing something and then you start doing something else and you don't really remember what you were doing before. So you just add comments to your code so that you keep track of what you're doing and where you're doing it. And also, if some other programmer is looking at your code, then it is much easier to understand if you commented it beforehand. So to write a comment, you're going to write 2 slashes and then your comment, for example, output hello, like this. Notice that when I run this program, nothing changes. It's just going to print hello, hello, which is what these cout statements do. This output hello is just going to be completely ignored. It is just for you to keep track of what you're doing. So this is a single line comment with these 2 slashes. If you want to comment multiple lines, then you're going to write 1 slash and 1 asterisk, and now you can comment multiple lines as you can see. If I just write 2 slashes, 2 slashes and comment, and then I just write like random numbers, these numbers aren't going to be commented because this is a single line comment. So if I run this, it's just going to generate an error. So I think that was all I wanted to show you today. I hope that was easy to understand. These are just kind of some basic stuff that you need to understand in order to start programming in C++, which is what I'm going to be teaching you to do in the next few videos. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.